Well, hello and welcome to the Photo Brigade podcast. I am Robert Kaplan, and I've got my good pal, Jose Lopez. How you doing?
I am great, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to be here and to be able to show some of my work and be able to talk about the things that I've witnessed as a photojournalist and maybe touch a little bit upon the mobile platforms and the future of the industry.
That's great. That's what we'll talk about. Look, you've got Suri on, and it's dictating everything we're saying right now.
Let me turn
Isn't
this
that
off.
hilarious?
See, this is new
I'm just
technology.
noticing that.
Yeah, thank you. It wasn't intentional.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that we should start out. Well, first of all, our background.
Yes.
So we met, I guess it's been about almost 10 years ago now when I was an intern at the New York Times.
Correct.
Which you just retired from.
Which I just retired from.
And after how many years?
I was blessed with a 31-year career at the New York Times.
31 years.
31 years, yeah.
That's a long time.
And it's not only it's rare, I think, that people will have careers that long at any one institution, but it's also, when I think back on it, the changes that I have seen.
Oh, I bet.
Having gone from the paper itself, in which I was, the photographers in that period of time were masters at shooting black and white,
right.
And then the color changed. The color came to the newspaper, and that changed, and then going from film to digital, and I think the equipment and the opportunities that you and your generation, future generation of photographers have, is just amazing.
I think it's pretty exciting because you got involved in some of the latest technology at the New York Times with the New York Times Now, NYT Now, an app on your phone, and we'll get into that as well. Before we start chatting too much, I just want to give a quick shout out and a thank you to our partners, Adorama, which is where we're recording right now in their event space, really nice space. We host monthly events, also do weekly podcasts from here, and they have all sorts of other events. So if you just go to adorama.com/events, you can see what they have to offer. Also, thank you to Canon Professional Services, a great organization.
Indeed.
And Tenba Bags, they make great camera bags, and Rode microphones for providing us with these great pieces of equipment.
This is a wonderful outfit that you have here.
This is really
I'm
nice.
very impressed with the space that they've given you and the dedication.
And they're doing more, believe it or not.
I'm sure they are.
They're building. They're building from this.
Great.
So, I'm going to pull up a photo just for now to have it back there. But so I was an intern in 2005.
Okay.
And I think at that point, you might have been transitioning from one desk to another because as editors do.
Correct.
You were on all sorts of desks, right?
I was.
I think we met when you were on real estate.
Correct.
Because I remember you telling me, okay, make sure you straight lines. Look at your lines. I don't want to see any of these warped angles and this and that.
Yeah.
And I still remember that every time I'm shooting real estate, whether it's for the paper or a
for
client,
yourself, yes,
or for myself,
right, yeah.
or for a client that pays more.
That's understood.
Understandable, right? One of the it's funny, like one of the real estate jobs. I don't know if I did it for you or for someone else, but it was a $95 million apartment.
I'm not surprised.
Here in New York,
Yeah.
right across the street from the Fifth Avenue Apple Store.
Oh my gosh.
And I've never, in the Sherry Netherland Hotel,
Right.
I've never been in anything so incredible. Like,
Right?
just
Yes.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Wrapping roof decks or whatever.
Well, what's interesting, and just an aside from that, is what's interesting, especially with New York real estate, is now that's considered pennies. Right?
Now it is, yeah.
I mean, back then,
120
it was
million now for these penthouse billionaire apartments.
Easily. Yeah.
Wild. So I should also say that there are a few editors that I've worked with, and you're one of those that I respect them all, of course, but I very, very much respect. You've got a background as a photojournalist.
Correct.
Before you were a photographer, so you know what it's like to be in the shoes of the photographers out there trying to capture the image and get it and deliver it and all that kind of stuff.
And it was one of the things that when I decided to make the transition from staff photographer to picture editor, Margaret O'Connor was the director of photography at that time, and her deputy was Mike Smith. And I remember talking to Mike about it and sort of making him understand that I was in a unique position of what I call a hybrid, if you would, in the sense of, because I had already been a staff photographer for the newspaper for 16 years, I then knew what it was to be in the photographer's shoes.
Yeah.
And I felt that I could better educate the newsroom as far as the visuals in that sense by being able to explain to them. So I think it was a win-win situation, and
Right.
I'm grateful that Mike and Margaret saw it that way as well.
Yeah. So let's look at just I'd like to, because what people like to see, I hear on the internet, are some photos up front. They get bored with all this talking and they want to see some photos. So let's jump in and maybe look at some of these photos that started your career out, and then we'll go back into your life.
I want to thank you for this opportunity to present. And what I did was I went back through a lot of my pictures and picked things long before the New York Times. This first image is shot in the aftermath of the New Mexico prison riot, which happened in early 1980. It is, to date, as I understand, one of the worst prison riots still in this country's history. 33 inmates died at the hands of fellow inmates.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was at that time a staff photographer for the Albuquerque Tribune and was sent to cover it. And after the National Guard and the state police were able to gain control of the prison, then they escorted us through so that we could see and record the damage that was done.
Wow, I bet that didn't smell good either.
It was one of the very first major news situation that I had ever covered in my life, and it was quite scary because in the takeover of the prison, the rioting inmates had also gained control of the radios. And it was hell on earth because the execution of the prisoners that they killed, they were literally broadcasting through the two-way radio.
Oh my gosh.
And in those days, those of us sitting out at the gates in our cars had Bearcat scanners, so we were hearing everything that was going on.
Oh my gosh, that's awful.
It was awful.
That's awful. Is there more of that?
There is. This is an example of one of the cell blocks, and that is the remains or blood streaks on the floor. And there were the new terminology that some of the officials were using during the press conference. One of the terms when he was describing this was overkill. In other words, the inmate had been murdered already in this cell, but then they dragged his body out and threw it over the third floor railing down onto the main floor. And then the other inmates were around there, and they would just continue to pummel the body until there was nothing left of it.
Unbelievable. Right? Unbelievable.
And then it was also one of the first times, now there's television shows about forensic anthropologists and forensic scientists, but this was the very first time, or one of the few times, that forensic anthropologists were literally brought into what was left of the gymnasium because they had turned it into the torture center. And what they're using here are rakes and screens to try and find the remains of some of the inmates that were tortured and killed in the gymnasium. The inmates, in an attempt to destroy the evidence, set the gym on fire, hoping that the ashes and everything else would destroy whatever was left.
Right. When did you say this was?
January of 1980.
January of 1980. Huh.
And then last but not least, there were a lot of the inmates then, the prison, the actual structure itself suffered so much damage it was no longer safe. So a lot of the inmates were then being taken to other penitentiaries or other state prisons.
And so this picture story that you did here was this for the Albuquerque Tribune?
Correct.
And so we'll back up a little bit. You worked for a number of different publications prior to working for the New York Times in '84, which is when you started.
Right.
So as a student, you were saying, where'd you go to school?
I'm a native of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Born and reared in Santa Fe, and I attended a small university in the southern part of the state, New Mexico State University, which is actually known for its engineering and agricultural schools. But I saw myself as an opportunity there to work for the Associated Press and covering the NCAA college sports.
Okay,
And $5 a print, but every Saturday I was at the football and basketball games, and as a result, my work got to be seen by a lot of picture editors in New Mexico, Texas, and Louisiana. And I made it a point to work very hard all 4.5 years that I was in college, because when graduation time came around, I knew that they will have seen my work, and that's exactly what happened.
I think you and I have a lot in common in that, because I did the same thing in college, working for the local Ohio Associated Press, shooting different sporting events and stuff. But I like that. It's a lot about networking.
Indeed.
In this.
And there were several stories that came through the area in which the actual AP staff photographers were either flown down from Denver or came out from Dallas. Some of them are still best of friends now, although we are Facebook chat, if you will.
Yeah.
But Pete Lebo is a dear friend who was a very young and talented photographer in the Dallas bureau at the time that I was in New Mexico, and now we're on Facebook chat together with each other. And there was also a tradition. There was an older AP photographer by the name of Ted Powers, who also took me under his wing and taught me a lot. So. Yes, it presented opportunities that I would not have gotten otherwise.
And so this led into working for...
So I worked for the AP while I was in college,
right.
And then on graduation was hired at the Albuquerque Tribune, covered this New Mexico prison riot, among other things, left them to go work for a very small newspaper in West Texas called the San Angelo Standard-Times. And I've got a couple of images from there if you want to move forward in that sense. This one. The San Angelo Standard-Times at that time was a Hart Hanks newspaper, and they had both a morning and an afternoon paper. And the afternoon paper was geared more towards features, and the photo department at that time was run by a colleague by the name of John Costello. And he was always open to picture stories and picture ideas. And this is a picture that I made in Miles, Texas, where the country barbershop was the place where all the local men would come in, have their morning coffee, chat, sit, and things like this. And I caught these two cowboys laughing because I was actually sitting in the barber chair just hanging out there one day. And I, out of the corner of my eye, saw the gentleman on the left wink to the gentleman on the right-hand side. And he sort of said to him, he turned to me and he said, I caught a 50-foot rattlesnake on my property the other day.
Yeah.
And I sort of playing dumb or going along with him, just sort of looked at him and said, 50 foot? Oh my God, I don't think I've ever seen anything that big. Those two started laughing so hard from my reaction that my camera came up quickly and it was like, who got who?
That's funny. That's great. I mean, catching a true moment as well. Indeed. But you were the butt of the joke is the funny thing.
Exactly, right.
Very
nice. It's okay.
There
have been books and there have now been movies out about Friday night football in West Texas.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, this is one of those scenes in which this young football player had taken an injury and they brought him off the field, and his father literally came down out of the stands to sort of check on him and pulling his arms to make sure, I hope nothing was broken at that time. It didn't seem to be.
So you were covering a lot of this high school football back in the day.
And anyone who knows the geography of West Texas knows that the counties are probably, and I mean no disrespect, the size of this store. So the San Angelo Standard-Times was responsible for 52 counties of West Texas.
Yeah.
And Friday night football, the staff of 3 photographers would actually have to cover 3 and 4 football games, which meant I drove to the farthest stadium, shot the first 3 minutes of kickoff, got in the car, drove to the next town, got out, shot 3 minutes of football, drove to the next town, and then came in with all the rolls of film, processed it all, and we were putting out a 28-page tabloid edition to the paper every Saturday morning.
Wow.
Yeah. And this happened to be one of the entries, and it was the cover. And, I'm sorry, a little self-promotion here. This picture won the Austin Headliners Texas Award for Best Sports Photo for the year of 1980.
Wow.
So I beat the Dallas Morning News, the Dallas Herald.
And you had 3 minutes to shoot it.
And I had 3 minutes to shoot
on
it.
film.
So there you go. See, I only needed a 30th of a second.
So shooting sports back in these days, I started shooting high school sports. I mean, I started in high school shooting high school sports, but at that time I was shooting with, shutters, what do you call it? Quick shutters and autofocus and all those things. It's totally different back in these days.
Yeah, this was all manual camera, manual focus.
Were you a sports shooter before you started?
I was, because the training with the Associated Press in college was the reason why there was an AP transmitter on the campus was to be able to make sure all the NCAA events were covered. There was an NCAA sanctioned school.
I see.
So yes, a lot of football, a lot of basketball.
I see.
Swimming events and things like that.
I see.
Yep.
And this is jumping ahead, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
but that's okay. I mean, that's sort of like from from San Angelo, I went to the Rocky Mountain News in Denver, Colorado, and I like to think that John Elway and I started our careers at about the same time.
Oh, yeah. Is that what it is? Okay. Yeah.
Which is funny because years later, I photographed him at his last Super Bowl.
Oh,
when he won the Super Bowl for the Broncos. So
you have some really memorable photographs of President Reagan.
Well, I saw an event that I was covering when I was in college introduced me to the White House press corps when they actually came in following Rosalind Carter. And when I saw that 707 pull up and she came out the front door, but I saw the rest of the press corps come out the back door, I just stood there and sort of announced to the universe, someday that's going to be me.
Yeah.
And the opportunity presented itself when I got hired here at the New York Times in 1984. The then deputy photo editor, Mark Bissell, came over to me and he said, so George Thames, the famous George Thames of the Washington Bureau, has decided to retire, and we're wondering if you might be interested in picking up and moving to Washington to pick up where he left off. And I was smiling from ear to ear, and I looked at Mark and said, I can be there tomorrow.
And so you moved.
So I moved from New York to Washington, D.C., and took over or tried to fill the shoes of the famous George Thames. And I was there for the last 3 years of Reagan's administration, all 4 years of the George Bush 41 administration, and the first 2 years of the Clinton administration.
Oh, wow.
Eight and a half years.
So you were there for a bit.
I was there for quite a while.
So I actually just visited the White House, did a podcast with Pete Souza.
Right, I saw that.
And I've been to the White House once before for a just in the press room, just for like a minute, right?
Right.
And so I obviously got some great access with him.
I saw that too.
And he's just, walking me around and all of a sudden I'm walking through this little, I think it's called
the colonnade. Yep.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is where all those famous photos are taken. And I'm trying to take pictures of Pete walking through, and I almost tripped over. It was almost a mess right there. But yeah.
This picture was made on a Saturday in which we were in the middle, or the country was in the middle of the Iran-Contra affair. And the president was not having his usual daily photo ops. And I remember going in on a Saturday morning and approaching the press secretary, Mark Weinberg, at that time. And this was when Reagan was doing his radio broadcasts in the Oval Office. And I walked up to Mark and I said, I'd like to have a few moments to photograph the president. Can I photograph him while he's being mic'd for the... And no. It was like everything that I put forth, no. And then I finally said to him, how about when he's leaving the Oval Office to go back to the resident? Mark looked at me and said, I'll be right back. And he ran up the stairs, and 30 seconds later he came running down and he said, okay, I'm going to put you on the promenade. You do not talk to him. You do not ask questions. I was like, great. So I got the access, although an AP and UPI photographer who were also there
right
were like,
here,
thank
right
you,
here.
Jose, thank you.
Okay.
And so the surprise came in that he's carrying a little teddy bear that had been given to him the day before by one of these poster children, and he was returning it to give it to Nancy. But Mark had no idea he was going to be carrying it with him. So he comes walking down the promenade talking to this little teddy bear, and I just quietly made my frames, and he actually stopped and engaged in conversation with us.
Oh.
Yeah, well, it was
Did you get yelled at for that afterwards? I mean,
no, Mark was there, and he recognized that the president initiated it.
So when the president talks to you,
you're fine.
Yeah, you're fine.
Right. Yes, exactly.
That's pretty amazing. Did you so covering the presidents, plural,
right?
Did you? I mean, I've covered an event here and there where I've photographed the president, Bush. I've never photographed Obama yet, but. Being in this, like close quarters with them all the time, did you end up having relationships with them?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think one of the beautiful things about being a member of the White House Press Corps is you show up every day. They get to know you, and they all start to understand who you represent, the New York Times in that sense. So I will say this, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but Reagan knew who I was. George Herbert Walker Bush knew who I was. I had to be introduced to Bill Clinton 5 times before he finally remembered who I was. Although I will say for the record, Hillary remembered my name from the very first meeting.
Really?
Yeah. It was on an elevator in Chicago when I was on the campaign 92, and the doors opened, and her Secret Service seemed surprised because they thought they had the elevator to themselves. But I stepped in and I saw her, and I stuck my hand out and introduced myself, and we had a little conversation. And from that day on, every time she'd see me, she'd just turn to me and say, hello, Jose, how are you?
Interesting how now she's, coming full circle and running for president yet again this year.
Indeed, yep.
And I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, is it wild to see these politicians kind of same sort of families, same sort of people?
It's an interesting thing. I do notice that, and I wish her well in that sense, and that's not an endorsement.
right. No endorsements.
But I think in regard to Hillary, what I'm more interested in is I think she has a very talented photographer who is working for her as her personal photographer, and that's Barbara Kinney.
Yes.
Yeah. I know Barbara because Barbara was part of the photo team when the Clintons were in the White House, so we got to know each other.
Okay, so from back then.
Yes,
okay,
from
gotcha.
back then. And it's one of the things that I've come to realize in my career is the photojournalism community is a very tight, very small sorority and fraternity.
Yes.
Everybody knows everybody.
Or knows somebody that knows somebody.
Right.
Or
and
something.
that's why you never do anything to soil your your bed, your ground, your area, and you don't do anything that could harm anyone else because it will come back.
Oh, it does.
Yeah,
it does.
It does. Yeah.
Let's talk about this photo because this is like a very famous photo.
Well, Jim Estrin, when I made this photograph, Jim Estrin, and it ran page 1 the next day. This was I call this Reagan's last look at the Oval Office. This was the morning that George Herbert Walker Bush was going to be sworn in as the 41st president. And Reagan, I was one of 7 photographers, I believe, or 9 photographers that had been included in the tight pool to come in and record his last moments in the Oval Office. And he had been standing at his desk. He made his way to the door, and just as he put his hand on the door, he turned back to give one last look at the Oval Office. And again, I think the beauty of it is the black and white.
Yeah.
I think there's something about it's just the moment as opposed to the competing nature of color.
Were you shooting black and white back then?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Everything was black and white.
Everything was black and white for the newspaper back then.
Yeah, it wasn't until like the 90s, right?
I believe so. The first color picture. But anyways, so this is one of those. Oh, James Estrin. So Jim turns to me the next morning and he puts his arm around me and he says, "You realize you've just made your obituary photo?"
Oh no!
Said, "Excuse me?" And he says, George Thames had his Kennedy leaning on the desk in the Oval Office. He says, "When you die, this will probably run with your obit saying Jose Lopez, the photographed it." And I was like, okay.
Well, let's hope that's not for a long time. Yes, absolutely. Very nice, very nice. And so,
part of that day, obviously.
So the same day, you actually made this shot on the same day.
Right. The new president, Bush, and First Lady Barbara, making their way down Pennsylvania Avenue on the parade that afternoon, and decided to get out part of the parade route.
So different now.
Yeah, and the Secret Service allowed it, and they walked for several blocks on that January day. We were very fortunate in the sense of, the second Reagan administration. I was there as part of the team to photograph it, but it was so bitterly cold. They moved the inauguration ceremonies indoors. So Paul Josefros was the pool photographer at that time, and no one else was able to witness it.
Yeah. So Paul, when I was an intern, he had just recently, I would think, retired, so I didn't get to work with him.
Okay.
But I think Fred Conrad took me to a museum or something with Paul. Forget what it was, MoMA. But yeah, great photographer.
He and I had the opportunity to work together many years together, and I'm grateful for all the advice and knowledge and the work that we did together. Another moment from the Bush White House when the Solidarity leader, Lech Wałęsa, had been invited to the White House to receive, I believe, some kind of a Medal of Honor or something like that. And as the president continued to read the speech for all that he had done, Wałęsa reached up and touched his heart. It looked like he was about to cry. So made this moment. And it's interesting because you can Google this and go back and look at Maureen Dowd's story. And Bush was saying things like, neither the princes nor the kings nor anything like that could defeat the communist extension. It took a simple electrician from the Solidarity Union to be able to do that.
Wow. So when you're covering politics like this, one of the things that I've always, been curious about is, do you get bored with it? Because it's the same things every day, kind of.
Well, it can be, but one of the things that I feel fortunate having been at the New York Times was, it was always in me that this was the newspaper of record.
Yeah.
Okay. I can remember being on the camera stand during one of the Reagan-Gorbachev summits, and there was a former colleague of mine from the Dallas Morning News or something like that, and he was sort of jibing me, if you will, or sort of poking fun of me, sort of saying, so, I guess this picture of yours is probably going to be all of 1 or 2 columns big in tomorrow's paper, and he was joking. And some of my fellow photographers were just shaking their heads because they were like, they knew where this was going. And I turned to him and I just said, listen, I'm really glad that your picture is going to be 6 columns by half page color. You'll probably get a double spread inside. Let me just ask you this. You see the gentleman on the stand? Do you think he reads the Dallas Morning News?
Oh, snap.
Right, and that just shut him up. And all my fellow Washington colleagues would just sort of, well done, Jose.
Well done. Well played. Well played. This is another one of your really famous photos.
Well, and you know, in the New York Times, they have what's called Publishers Award, in which the publisher sort of, recognizes. Thank you. And this was during the '92 campaign, and it was in New Jersey, and the president had landed for a campaign event, and he started to walk towards the helicopters because they were going to transport him to another event. And there were all these supporters behind us, and they kept screaming at him, you know, for support and things like that. And as I was following him with my lens, I was thinking to myself in my head, just turn around. And he spun around once.
Pop.
And pop with the motor drive, and then he literally just spun around, and then he kept on walking. The Publishers Award with the editor's citation said that, you know, the big every campaign has a slogan, and this was the one that was the slogan during this campaign was "It's the economy, stupid." And it just sort of, as an editor came up to me afterwards and said, "You captured the visual metaphor of a man who seems out of step with the country at this period in history."
Interesting.
And I believe, if I remember correctly, it did run page one at that time.
Yeah, I mean, what I love so much about it is just black and white. He's the contrast of him. He's framed perfectly with these protectors.
Exactly.
Like, just everything's the opposite of what's happening in the photo.
The Secret Service calls it the protective box because there are agents on the four corners plus his lead agent that's always directly behind him. So it was timing.
Wow.
Thank you.
Nice shot.
And then here we go, a little flashback to the Clintons in the sense of this was on the night that I believe they won Illinois and Michigan, and we were in Chicago celebrating a very young-looking president and his
totally
wife at
different
that time.
looking. Yeah.
So you asked the question about, do you ever get bored? Well, it's a combination of thinking in the sense of not only are the pictures that are published going to be a matter of record, but everything else in the archive. And it's, no doubt, 50, 60, 100 years from now, someone is going to be able to go back and find the Jose Lopez moment of the '92 campaign with Bush, Clinton, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, that is pretty cool. I mean, it's true in what Jim said to you about the obituary photo and about the photos that you take for publications such as this will always and forever be out there, and people will refer to these. It's history.
It's also the kind of thing where I tried to approach it every day with, yes, I'm going to be seeing these same characters every day, but it's sort of always looking for something different, whether it be a lens angle, a position angle, or just the moment itself. And there's another photograph that's in my portfolio that will show you that sometimes you don't even need the principles in the photograph to make the photograph.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the moment when Barbara Bush welcomed the incoming First Lady Hillary Clinton to the White House, and she got out of the vehicle and ran up to her and caught this moment of the two of them falling in embrace. And I'm going to share this with you, and I would invite everyone to Google it because I couldn't believe what Barbara Bush said. But after she hugged her, she put her arm around her and she started to walk her past the press corps that was assembled on the lawn there to go into the White House. And she pointed to all the reporters out there and she said, "Avoid this crowd like the plague."
Oh.
And the C-SPAN audio and video still exists. So you can go back and check it because I did before I made sure to say that caption.
Oh, man, that's funny.
Yeah. And then the Clintons together in the the old executive office building office where they were doing an event, but it was a moment of capturing their first week together, working together in the office.
It's so interesting. I mean, like, you don't really see her in a skirt anymore either. She's a pantsuit lady these days, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I'm mistaken.
No. But the styles changed.
The styles have changed. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Look at his tie too.
Exactly.
Little kids on it and everything.
Right. Yep.
I met. I'm gonna go back. I met Bill Clinton up in Harlem at his offices. I photographed him, believe it or not, for Sports Illustrated.
I believe that. Yeah.
There was a basketball player bringing some youths from Harlem up to meet him into the office, and I mean, my impression was, I'm just some guy walking through with this group, and he really took my hand, looked at me in the eye, just felt like there was a moment.
Correct.
And of course, I'm sure, obviously he's like that with he's a politician, but there's something very warm and inviting about him, except for the fact that he's forgot your name 5
Well,
times,
but you know, it's the kind of thing where one of the things that the photographers were aware of in the first moments of covering him in 1992 was he would make it a point to stay in the building and shake everyone's hand that had come to the event.
That's nice.
Which is why over the weeks and months of the campaign, the crowds continued to grow and grow and grow. I mean, he really was. It was something that I saw in him that I hadn't seen in Bush or Reagan, and there was that connection with the people.
Well, there's that famous photograph of him meeting President Kennedy back when he was a kid.
Correct.
And visited.
Right.
And I'm sure that probably, is a big, I might be shaking the next president in 30, 40 years from now.
Exactly.
Which is pretty amazing.
Right. Yep. This was, so we're covering something every day.
And we're in color now.
And we're in color now. And sometimes it's like not even the principals. This was the summit between Mikhail Gorbachev and George Bush. But one of his officials, and I'm forgetting his name now, I'm sorry. He's from the country of Georgia at that time, but he was getting ready to leave, and he arrived at the pool with James Baker, who was the Secretary of State at the time, and that's Baker's wife and his daughter. And he surprised us. He surprised everyone. He took the daughter in his hands to shake her hand and then drew her in and gave her a kiss on the forehead. And the Secretary of State and his wife were just sort of taken back with that. So it was, but here again, one of those moments where everyone knows what Bush and Gorbachev looked like, but this was something different.
Finding a different moment.
Yep. And then
Mandela,
when he addressed a joint session of Congress with the President of the Senate and the House Speaker behind him.
Man, this is so very dated, this shot.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Our wonderful former senator, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, in one of the lighter moments, this ran in the paper, and I thought he was going to give me hell for it, but instead I got a letter from him asking if they could have the rights to it for his book.
Oh, really?
So it ended up becoming one of his...
They only call you when they're upset or they want something.
Exactly.
That's
right.
all. That's just the way it is.
But he was brilliant.
Yeah.
And then I actually got a phone call from one of the senior editors the afternoon that I photographed this. This was Senator Biden when he was on the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, and this was a true moment of real anger.
This is Joe Biden?
This is Joe Biden.
Oh, my gosh.
He was directing his anger at then Secretary of State George Shultz, and for the lack of the administration's policy in regard to South Africa and apartheid. Uh-huh. And, today we would say he ripped him a new one. Uh-huh. And I could just tell that as his voice was getting louder, senators don't scream. That's just a no-no in the Senate. And I moved out of the well and positioned myself so that when he started flashing these papers at George Shultz, I started pushing the button. And a senior editor at the Times called me later that afternoon. He said, "This is remarkable." He says, was he really that angry?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, yeah.
And so a situation like this, we've shown some photos in, I think, Jay Westcott, who's out in D.C., what it's like to be in a room like this. Because essentially, they're sitting at a table, and you're like sitting on your butt on the floor in front of them.
Correct.
With a group of like 20 other photographers.
Right.
With lenses pointed right at the same face.
Right.
And so you did something different than all of these guys, got a different angle then to create this photo.
Well, to capture this photo.
Right.
Yeah.
It was anticipating what might happen.
And it's a matter of, and I'm sure not only you, but every photographer who's watching this podcast, is that you have a sixth sense and you learn to trust it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just your senses. You start hearing something, and especially when I start hearing a senator's voice rise in anger, it's just sort of like, wait, it's out of the normal, and that's why I moved into position so that I could watch him.
But that's also says something about you having been shooting this for some time.
Correct.
If I had gone, maybe I wouldn't have known, because I'm not covering this stuff regularly.
Understood.
I wouldn't have known that something new was happening.
Right.
But having the experience
yes.
was key in something like this.
And here again is another example of this was during the Clinton administration. And it was an event in which they were going to be giving these two gentlemen and several others the Arts Medal of the Year. And I believe that's Cab Calloway on the left, if I serve it, and the gentleman on the right-hand side, I'm not forgetting his name.
Is that Ray Charles?
Thank you.
Okay.
Ray Charles.
I wasn't sure.
I knew you would recognize him. But They took the photographers out early, as they call pre-position, so that we could get our positions early. And this Air Force gentleman was bringing this gentleman in the wheelchair, and he reached over and slapped him or tapped him on the back of the head with the program. And I saw this happening. I saw him being wheeled in, so I started following him. And then when he reached over and slapped him with the paper, that's when I caught it.
Yeah.
And after I caught that, the wire photographers were looking at me like, yeah. And I just said, I'm done. I don't need to stay for the official event.
Adios. Yeah.
I mean, we did because,
course.
anytime the president's out, you have to be protective coverage.
Yeah.
But this was a much better picture, we felt.
Michael Jackson
during his tour, and this was at the Meadowlands. And this is one of those stories that I love to share with young photographers, and it's all about doing your homework and being prepared. The Meadowlands was the second stop on the tour, the first one having been in Dallas, Texas. And I had a dear friend who was a former college friend that was a staff photographer at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. So I called him and I said, "You were at the Michael Jackson concert, right?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Tell me everything that I need to know." And then for 45 minutes, I just took notes over the phone. Okay. Anyone who's covered a live concert knows you normally go in, they put you in the pit, right?
Yep.
And you get the first 3 songs,
yep.
right? And then after that, you're going out. Okay.
Usually different for folks like these guys.
Right. Okay. So at this concert, I showed up at the Meadowlands and I had a hand cart or a luggage cart that had a 600 millimeter lens in it, a large tripod in a bag, a small ladder, and my camera gear. And I showed up at the position where all the photographers were going to be picked up, and all the other New York press photographers were looking at me like, he's a rookie. Oh, aren't you the new guy at the New York Times? Because this was before I went to Washington. This was in 1984. And I was just smiling. I just said, yeah, I am. And they're like, "Have you ever covered a concert before?" I was like, "Don't worry, we'll see what's going to happen."
Happens, yeah.
So the Jackson representative comes out, he gathers us up, and he says, "All right, let's go in. We're gonna set you up." So we start going into the tunnel. We get into the Meadowlands, the field, and stuff like that. And the rows of chairs on the floor, like, sort of went up to the 50-yard line. And when we got to the last row of chairs, he turned around and he threw his arms out like this. He goes, "This is it. Last row, set up." And all the photographers went nuts. They thought they were going to be in the pit,
right?
And they weren't. And I took apart my ladder and I set up my tripod.
Got on your little ladder,
put my 600 up. And the reason why I took a taller tripod was Joe Harone, who was the photographer in Dallas, told me, he says, by the second song, they're going to be standing on the chairs and you need to be above them.
Yeah.
So crank that 600 up with the Nikon. And to this day, Bob Deutsch, a stock photographer from USA Today, who was part of this team, he was smiling at me and he just looked at me and said, "How'd you know?"
And I told him, a great guy. He's totally like that.
I told him all about Joe and he says, "Good for you. You figured it out." The other photographers were beside themselves. I mean, I don't even know if they made a decent frame given how far we were back, but this was shot with a 600.
Doing your research,
And again, because I know there may come a day that I would need help from Bob. So for one song, I said, "Bob, you can have the lens." And that was in the day when photographers all shot Nikons so interchanging, being able to help. And he was thankful and he jumped up on the ladder and he got his 2 or 3 rolls worth of film.
That's another thing you mentioned, being nice to sometimes here in New York it's a little bit rough.
Sure.
Photographers can be rough and very competitive, and I've had a little bit of both. Sure. I've always been of the mindset in general to pay it forward.
Indeed. Absolutely.
And
as have I.
And I was just talking just before this podcast, we did a podcast with Keith Bedford, who was one of my friends, and he was a freelancer when I first got it, and he was like very warm to me, you know.
Yeah.
And I've had instances where you run out of a memory card or battery or something, and someone helps you out, and you remember these things.
You absolutely
do.
Yeah.
And I remember I was at the U.S. Open tennis back when I was an intern.
Okay.
And so I had some Times gear. I think I had like a 300 and a 400 or something like that. And there was this young kid that was in the pit behind me, and he was taking photos. And he was like 15. Started chatting with him, and I said, "You want to borrow my lens? I'm going to edit and do some stuff for now," and let him borrow my 300. And he's like, wow.
Exactly.
So, fast forward 10 years, now he's staffing at I think Getty.
Fabulous.
You know, it's like he's made a name for himself, and I had forgotten about that actually.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So we had done a podcast, and it was like he reminded me, like, oh yeah,
that's great.
And I always joke, I still have a farmer's tan from that U.S. Open in the sun in the middle of the summer. Man, have you ever covered the U.S. Open?
Yeah.
So you have covered lots of sports.
I
as well.
love football, and the beauty of being the staff photographer at the Rocky Mountain News in Denver for a little over 3 years is a sports crazy town. And my football got very good covering the Broncos there because I've been blessed in my career that wherever I've been at the right place at the right time. And my time in Denver was when we were having a great newspaper war with the Denver Post.
Oh.
And Rich Clarkson, who
Rich Clarkson,
the famous Rich Clarkson, who I'm giving a shout out to here, who helped me in my career. But Rich was the director of photography at the Denver Post, and I was shooting at the opposite paper, the Rocky Mountain News, and it was amazing how many photographers from both papers would show up both for the in-town games and how many we would send away for the out-of-town games.
Yeah.
And it was just
different
wonderful.
times.
Different times.
Yeah, nowadays, it's just like, AP, Getty, whoever will cover it for the most part.
Yeah, no, you're right. And a lot of that is, none of the social media or the web existed the way it does today in that sense. So, you were incumbent to get that news from your newspapers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Totally different.
Yeah,
That's true.
Indeed.
That's true. Do you miss covering sports? I got over it, basically.
I share that with you, and I'm going to tell you something. I was at a Giants or Jets football game on a beautiful fall afternoon, and I was bored out of my mind. And I realized this is not good. You cannot be bored out of your mind because then you get lazy and you start missing things. And then, so that was when I decided it was time to come in and be a picture editor.
Oh, okay. So this is your transition then?
That was the transition.
Interesting.
It was sort of like, okay, well, it was time to come in and talk to Mike about coming off and coming back in and working as an editor then.
And so when about was that?
Roughly, now I'm going to just jump back here real quick in the sense of this picture that you're showing is Bonnie Blair when she won the gold medal in speed skating at the 1988 Olympics in Calgary, Alberta. And I covered the winter games there by myself.
Oh, wow. Holy moly.
So, yeah, it was.
I've never covered an Olympic games because I've only heard how much of a pain in the ass it is.
It is, yeah.
Like, I'm sure, it's amazing you get your portfolio images and stuff.
You do.
But at the same time, you're like...
The logistics are just,
No sleep, getting to and from.
And it was the kind of thing of, I'm a shout out to our staff photographer, fellow staff, Doug Mills, who's apparently an expert skier because the way he covers downhill is he goes to the event, he packs up all his equipment, he skis down to his location. That's what I've heard certain photographers do.
That's a thing we should talk about, Doug Mills, because he basically is doing. He's a staff photographer based in D.C., kind of doing that job that you did for 8 years, covering politics, all that kind of stuff. Yep. He's the one that's always on Air Force One. He and Stephen Crowley, right?
Yes, correct.
Those two.
Yep.
And yet, we were thinking, like, what is it like? He's always coming up with new photos. They're both coming up with great photos. And then you see him, like, all of a sudden, it's the Olympics. He's out in the middle, out there just kicking butt.
And he's still coming up with great pictures.
Like some of the best photos.
Yeah.
Like, how do you transition from shooting politics, or is it kind of the same?
It's the same. And I'll tell you something. There's an old saying, as old sayings go in the industry, that a picture editor once said to me years ago. He says, if you can shoot sports, you can shoot anything.
Yeah.
Because there's an anticipation.
Oh, yeah.
There's also, you fall into that zone of awareness where you just anticipate that it's about to happen and you're motoring down or you're capturing it. So I think in Doug's case, as in anyone's case, his covering politics and his covering sports, they help each other. They go hand in hand, and they make one the better of the other. I'm not saying that correctly, but I think you know what I'm getting.
It's the yin and yang sort of situation.
And while we're on that, I just want to give a shout out to the new young intern in Washington, D.C., Zach Gibson.
Oh.
And a little history there, because I'm very proud of it. Zach is the son of the former AP staff photographer, Greg Gibson, who I worked alongside of in Washington, as did Doug. And now Zach is picking up the torch.
Following in the footsteps. I like that. That's great. And so he's interning at the Times?
He's interning in the Washington Bureau of the Times, now working with both Steve and Doug.
So the deal with that now, because back when I was Back when I was a kid, when I was an intern,
right? Yeah,
I think I spent 1 week of my, I don't know, actually I ended up doing it for like 6 or 7 months. I got extended.
Great.
But I did 1 week out there.
Right.
But now they've got like multiple interns these days.
I believe so. One for the New York or two for the New York office, although I'm not sure about that. And Beth Flynn is the editor who would be the one to get in touch with if anyone out there is interested about future internships at the New York
And there's
Times.
some website. There's all sorts of internships. There's the photography. There's the design.
Correct.
And then there's like... I forget what there's another one. The reason why I remember this is because there's a bit of a competition between interns, because at least when I was an intern, there was a prize. It was like a $1,500 prize or something like that. Wow. I remember I said to myself, if I get this prize, I'm going to get that Pottery Barn leather chair that I always sit in whenever I go to Pottery Barn.
Yeah, right.
I ended up getting it.
Good for you.
So I've got my New York Times leather chair.
Goal achieved, as we say. So the 96 Summer Olympic Games, we'll all remember, had an impact in the sense of the bomb that was exploded in Centennial Park. And I'm sure the officials hated the fact that the glass windows that were on the press center literally faced and looked down into where the bomb had detonated and done its damage. So this was, taking one of those long 600 millimeter, 400 millimeter lenses and getting up into that area of the press center and then just looking down into it.
I remember this vaguely. I mean, I was younger too, obviously, but were there fatalities in this?
I believe there were, and I don't remember. I think it was no more than one or two, but yes, I believe there was.
Still awful. Right? Yeah. I remember it was a big news item.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So what we got here? Wow.
Well, here is my one and only war photography, if you will, and I'm glad it was only this bad and not worse in that sense. And obviously, a huge shout out to people like Tyler Hicks and others who have seen
and do this.
I mean, and do it well.
And risk their life on a daily basis to bring this information, which is very important.
So at the end of 1995, Nancy Lee, who was the photo editor at that time, pulled me into her office and she said, would you be interested in going to Bosnia for us and covering the end of the war? And I was like, what's going on? She says, well, the Americans are about to take up the peacekeeping duties, and we're not sure they're going to be met with approval, or they're liable to meet with resistance, and we're sending reporters there, so we want to send a photographer. And I said, absolutely, I'm willing to go. It's one of those kinds of assignments that if you say no to, you're never going to be asked again.
And you'll regret it,
you'll regret it. So I said yes, and I worked with Ray Bonner, who was one of our reporters then at that time, and Chris Hedges as well. And I was in country there for about 6 weeks. And the interesting thing was, as what I call myself a Balkan veteran now, if you will, there's nothing like a Balkan winter in the sense of how cold it was. And the inside joke amongst all war photographers is it's great for a diet, because I lost 15 pounds while I was there, I mean, because a lot of lessons that I learned, but the basic one and the very first one is you lose all sense of infrastructure. So you're lucky to find a meal a day if you're, if you're like that. Anyway, this was photographed when Bosnia, like other countries, the number of mines that were planted and still exist in the woods today. And this was a mine detonation when they were clearing the route that the Americans were eventually going to be coming down when they decided to take up the duties.
And so you say this was your one and only time that you kind of got involved with conflict photography.
Conflict or war photography.
Did it scare you straight? Is that why?
Yeah, it's a funny thing, because in my career, I've been shot at other police events or, police situations or hostage situations, and, been roughed up at other things. But I can honestly say that in the 6 weeks that I was there, I was not exposed to any kind of gunfire or shot at, other than having to be careful where you walked in the woods because you could trip a mine wire or something like that. But this was more a feeling of ghosts that existed in the woods because of the number of mass graves that you could come upon or things like that.
It's awful.
And it was interesting because in some of the books that I've read since then, I was always taken with the Native American soldiers who would not go into the woods to patrol, but would literally turn to their supervisors and say, "Don't you hear the voices? I'm not going into those woods." And I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been of the feeling, like I've I think in college it's like, oh yeah, I want to go cover wars.
Sure.
Do you want to know what made me absolutely decide I never want to cover a conflict?
Tell me.
Chris Hondros, came to Ohio University, where he went. I don't know if he's sure. Well, he went to school at OU before me, but he came to visit for some reason or another, and decided to. The professors had him show some of his work, and he showed my class. He had a presentation, and instead of just showing his 20 favorite photos or whatever, he decided to show our whole class the raw take from the Liberian Civil War.
Wow.
One of his famous shots of the guy jumping up with the bazooka after he'd fired it.
Yeah.
And it scared me straight. I mean, it was literally from the minute he walked out of his hotel, going through the streets, showing all the bullets, people being wheelbarrowed in pieces, still alive and dying, all the way up to that point, which was that shot where he's firing the bazooka, jumps up. That was the pinnacle. And then he came back after that. And I just remember thinking at that point, like, whoa. I mean, I don't know, like, I would love to maybe make a lasting image like that, but I don't know if I want to go through that and see that. And it's like, it's hard to look at some of these types of photos that, just.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing because, we go about our day and we have a sense of right and wrong and left and right and top and bottom.
Yeah.
And you end up in this scenario or in this kind of, and throw that all out the window. It literally, this assignment, I converted to Buddhism after it. And it was because, this forced me to be so present every moment, in the sense, and as my Lama is always teaching us, he says, you're at choice in every moment of your life. And the second great lesson that I learned from him is pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So it was while I was there, it was just coming to understand.
This is still here.
We're still in Bosnia, first weekend after the Dayton Peace Accords, and this choir, we were in a cathedral, and it was the first time that the members of the church had been able to come back to the church safely to celebrate. And I went up I heard these fabulous voices singing and made my way up to the choir loft and photographed them in prayer.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this job did have a lasting impact on you.
It did, and then this is, as they say in the Army, this is the first of the first of the first. First tank of the big red one, the first regiment in that sense. This is the bridge. This is the bridge that they built across the Sava River. The U.S. troops did, because as you can see, the bridge behind it was actually destroyed, and it was the bridge that would connect to Zagreb. But the Americans crossed the Sava River, and this is the first tank coming across to.
How did you transmit back then?
Well, the other thing that I wanted to share about this assignment was this was the first digital camera that the New York Times purchased on behalf of this assignment. And do you remember those Canon cameras that stood this tall?
Yeah.
And they shot with PC MCI cards, and you got a 3 megabyte file.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's what all these are in that sense.
Goodness gracious.
This is a woman who is in what's left of her bedroom. They had escaped the war, had moved to Germany. 3 years later, they decided to come back and see what was left of their house. And their house was literally on the front lines facing the Serbs, and there wasn't much left of it.
That's got to be awful coming back to a site like this. Okay. So before we get into all this editing type stuff, we should start. I want to sort of talk about that transition and what it's been like to be an editor now for like. So that was, when did you transition into being an editor? 16
years as a staff photographer, and the last 15 years of my career as a picture editor, and having sat on the desks of sports, national, foreign. At one point, they, in an attempt to sort of cut back, they made me the weekend national and foreign picture editor, which means the whole A-book was mine on Sundays and Mondays. And I was physically running from 2 desks on the 3rd floor newsroom every Sunday night to put the paper together and stuff like that.
The old newsroom.
The old newsroom, right, correct, on West 43rd Street, yeah. And then from then on, also national photo editor again, and then real estate. And then real estate into business. And then from business, Michelle McNally was very kind and generous in giving me the NYT Now mobile app position.
And we'll get into that soon.
Right.
So one of the things that I think I briefly kind of discussed this just before we went on air here was the relationships that photographers have with editors. And as an intern, I think I kind of started talking about this earlier, but working with you, it was both like you were one of the editors that really took an interest in communicating, talking, trying to teach me a thing or two rather than just giving me an assignment or an idea of what to do. So I was always a little worried about like you, because I'd always, and also as a photographer, freelance photographer, any kind of photographer, lots of the editors don't give you any feedback.
Right.
It's like you just turn in your work, you go on to your next one, and it shows up in the paper, whatever, and it's over. But you always, like, I always got some sort of like email, whether it's like, do you have any more of this? Or what do you think about that? Or here's an idea about this. But you would always get in touch with me after the shoot to tell me if you needed something else, but also to tell me like, you did a really great job at this. I love what you did here, there, and that is incredibly refreshing.
Well, it's important. I mean, the one thing that I've always enjoyed in my picture editing role was the relationship that I would have with the photographer.
Yeah.
And there are those photographers that welcome it, and there are others that were just like, yeah, they don't want to go there, and that's all right. But I felt it as my responsibility as the picture editor who is going to be working with your work. First of all, having been in your shoes, remembering how many stories I would go out on and had absolutely no clue as to why I was there or what was going on. So I was going to change that. I was going to make sure you understood this is what the story is about. This is why we're sending you there. These are the people to look for. Here's the reporter's name and phone number in case they're not with you, but you have questions that you want to ask. So, the truth of the matter is your work or any photographer's work is going to be strongest when they have all that information and they are then able to process it as to how they're going to make that a visual.
Also, one of the things about being a good photographer out there is knowing, not having to have your hand held as a photographer. And I think that you probably respect that as well as an editor, not having a photographer, I don't know what to do, get those kind of, you just got to make it work. Right. You got to figure it out with the information that you have and just sort of make it work.
And for me, it was also the kind of thing where because I was a photographer, sometimes in those after-shoot critiques or sometimes in the mid-shoot critiques, and some of the photographers, in fact, yourself included, would be willing to go back out and do it again because you suddenly saw something. Yeah. But I've had those photographers who were trying to snow me in the sense of saying, I shot it this way because blah, blah, blah. And then when I turned to them and say, really, if I were you, I would have used a 300-2.8, step 25 feet to your left, sunk to my knees, done this. And there's silence on the phone, and they're like, oh, I didn't realize you know how to. And I'm like, so let's pick up this conversation again and talk about just, total change of mind in that sense. But I think it was important to be able to say that you're talking to one of your own. You're talking to someone who's been behind the camera, who knows what you're going through. And a lot of times I would even cut off in the office any discussion in working with the editors about, well, can we see this? Can we get that? In other words, sometimes certain word editors were great about envisioning the perfect Pulitzer Prize winning picture and then were sorely disappointed when it didn't come in. And it was like, well, first of all, it's not real, so let's deal with what's real and let's make that the best.
Right. Yep. I've had a lot of learning experiences working with you. I mean, all the stuff that we've discussed before, but also making some mistakes. Yeah. So for instance, with the social media these days, there was one instance where I was on an assignment and I tweeted something I shouldn't have tweeted.
Yes,
do you recall this?
I do recall it.
And I was on the receiving end of David Carr, the late David Carr, yes. Giving me a couple nasty phone calls, and I'm sure he discussed that with you. And I'm like, oh shit! And I got a call from you, kind of explaining, and I erred. I didn't realize there was some sort of exclusivity, and I kind of mentioned that I was doing something on Twitter. Yep. And quickly deleted it. But the way that you handled it, I think, was really great. Instead of just yelling at me and being mad at me and telling me to go find other work, it was like, this is a learning experience. These are the people you should talk to and make them understand that you've learned your lesson. Right. And there's a graceful way out of any situation. Well, and sometimes, you make mistakes.
Right, exactly. And just so that you're not the only one who's done that. I've had a couple of other freelance photographers who will remain nameless, who suddenly I see it on their Facebook feed, and I pick up the phone and call them and I say, congratulations, you've pre-published the story that the New York Times was going. What? And then within the next 10 minutes, it's down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. It's a learning experience.
And you have to realize that these social media mediums, everyone can see them.
Right,
and
that's it. You'd be surprised.
You would be surprised.
and especially the readers of the New York Times. I mean, they are eagle-eye readers out there.
Yeah.
The number of things that I have had to make sure that we have not only correct, but the detail in the captions and in the photograph and things like that, because there will be some reader out there who writes in and says, I'm sorry, that isn't red lettuce, that's green leaf lettuce.
Right, yeah. Exactly. So let's get into your editing stuff. I don't know if there's particular things you want to talk about.
Some examples, and in the sense of when I was the national picture editor, and this is the coverage that we did on that Rhode Island club that burned to the ground when the rock band set off its
people in it.
Fireworks, and the number of people that were killed in that. So this was one of an example of the national pages that I covered. Moving forward, we did a week of the number of U.S. soldiers that were killed, I believe, in the Iraq War.
I remember this. Yeah. We did even. That was a week. I remember you guys, the Times used to, at least during the Iraq War, once a year or something, have a page devoted to headshots.
Right. Yeah.
Who was that? There was a lady that worked there.
I don't remember which editor was that oversaw that, but yeah, we
she left a long time ago.
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
The coverage of Ronald Reagan's funeral. Working with some of the other editors and putting together.
How was that for you? Kind of with this personal, this is where you started.
Well, yeah, no, it was interesting because as I was watching it on national TV, it was like I could see all the former people that I used to go to with requests to be able to gain access to him, and recognizing a lot of his staff that was there, and seeing how much they've aged in that period of time. Also,
were you working in D.C. during that assassination attempt on Reagan?
No, I wasn't there.
That was after.
Yeah.
Okay.
I came in the last 3 years of the Reagan administration.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Got it.
And then recently, this is a clip from the Sunday business section, and our own staff photographer Damon Winter,
he's my favorite.
Yeah, he's amazing. And I sent him with our reporter, and they were doing a story about the technology that Alaska Airlines is looking to do or looking to work with in the sense of satellite radar as opposed to ground radar, and which allows them to fly, certain landing patterns through mountain passes that can sometimes be snow and fog bound.
Yeah.
And he did such a wonderful job on it and gained access to, Alaska Airlines was allowing him to do things that, to be able to photograph. And this is the presentation that we ran in the Sunday business section, and it warmed my heart that I got a note from Damon, an email that said, wow, he says, you're changing the Sunday business section into National Geographic.
That is the thing that I remember that you did with real estate as well.
Yeah.
That was the big thing that you had. I remember seeing you in the old building, going to that office, which was on a different floor than everyone else, and you were saying that to me, like, we are changing things. We don't want this to be just a mugshot of a building. We want to get in. We want to really cover this and show, and then all of a sudden photos. I think when Michelle came in, a lot of that started happening in all the different sections.
Right. Yes.
But I remember that was one of your things, was really changing and using photos better.
When I was sent to the real estate section, one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I did was change the look of the section. And I understand what real estate is, and there are certain times that we need to photograph a building, but I came in with an attitude that said real estate's about people, and the people who choose to plunk down that much money to buy their apartment, rent it, etc.
Right.
And I can remember we did a story the very first weekend that I was sitting on the desk about a woman who suddenly she was in danger of losing her home because of a mortgage paper foul up or something like that. And Robert Stolaric made this beautiful portrait of this woman crying outside her home as she was telling him his story. Mm-hmm. And when I showed that image to the editor, Trish Hall, she looked at it and she looked at me and she said, "We've never run pictures like this before." And I said, "Well,
welcome to the new world.
Strap in.
This is what's going to happen.
This is what we're going to do."
So that was what I was going to ask you. So, compared to, say, this layout, right? This is back in the day.
Right.
Not back in the day.
Well, no, but it is. I mean,
for you, I guess.
But you look at the fonts and the type, you can see how aged that page looks.
And there's less big photos.
Right.
You were and you fast forward to this, and you've got larger photos spanning 2 pages.
Exactly, the double truck. Yeah.
So what is the difference? Like, say, working for the A1, national, international, in terms of what you can do with photography versus working for like business or whatever.
And even with this, our photographer, I believe Nick Oxford in Oklahoma, who did this wonderful story on the smoke shops, the vape shops in Oklahoma. The difference is, since 9/11, the New York Times has become far richer and more understanding of the power of visuals, and especially good photojournalism. And Michelle McNally has taken it farther and continues to do so. And the truth of the matter is, we live in a time and an age where visuals are just a key component to everything.
Yep.
And in order for the Times to keep up with its competitors and with the times, it needs to adapt, and it has adapted. I threw this page in because in working with the business section, I was working with 5 reporters and a couple of editors who just finished looking at the problems with the GM defects and the key ignitions. And this just recently won the Scripps Howard Award, I believe, of some kind for its reporting in that sense. But this was an opportunity of showing the 13 deaths tied into the defect that...
So at the New York Times, there's probably, a dozen different desks, different sections.
Correct.
And, each one, you would be doing the business front and stuff inside it, but you guys have an A1 meeting, at which point all of these different editors kind of pitch to the front page saying, look, here are the stories we think are important. We would like you to consider this for the front page.
Right.
Every day, right?
Correct.
You always, that's kind of your goal, is to get your section onto the front page.
Correct.
Right. So how is that in a meeting like? I remember I saw one page one meeting with Michelle brought me in when I was an intern.
Okay.
And it was the first. Maybe you were there. It was the first time ever that they used a cell phone photo on the front page of the New York Times. It was a big debate. It was during the Madrid bombings, the train bombings, and someone took a cell phone photo going out. And that was obviously, that was the story. But obviously, big news trumps, features.
Sure. Yeah.
And so what is it like? Is it, do you guys kind of look at each other like, I got the story. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, I think there's always been a healthy competition and a respect amongst the photo editors. The truth of the matter is, whether it's a feature or an enterprise story in which you work hard to get the image that will not only tell the story but be representative on the page one, and then you present that. The photo desk has a page one representative photo editor who presents that meeting. So I would then hand what we gathered and felt best worked to that editor, and then they would present it to the overall.
And is there always like a great feeling when you've got it, when you
absolutely.
And is the excitement also like for the photographer as well?
I would hope so.
Like, do you let the photographer know? I don't think I've worked on you with something that I've had an A1 for, but is it like, hey, guess what?
Yeah. I mean, there were times that if I had the time, or especially if it was a freelance photographer, it was sort of like either ping them with an email or call them and say, "Congrats, you're on it. You made it." Yeah.
This is a beautiful front.
This is
soapbox.
One of the things that, and I want to give a shout out to 2 of my colleagues that are sitting here in the front row.
Yes.
Zvi Lowenthal, who worked with in the business section, and former staff photographer Marilyn K. Yee. Thank you for coming in, but. Zvi and I were responsible for the Sunday section of the business section, and once a month we had what was called the photo essay. And this young photographer had gained access to the old steel mills in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And after a rainstorm, the rust and the color that comes out from the steel and stuff like that. So I had actually seen this in, I believe, like a Camera 35 magazine or something. And I saw a couple of her pictures, and I found her, again, through Google, thank you, and contacted her and said, I'd be interested in seeing more and running this as a photo essay. Would you be willing to send it in? And we did that.
Sure enough.
Yeah.
Sure enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look at this.
The
photos.
What I loved about being in the business section was I learned so much in just life, if you will. And I think when you're inducted into the desk that you're covering, is like everything now to me is business. Everything is, even spring planting.
Yep.
And this was a photograph or an essay that one of our photographers did out in Illinois, and just beautiful images. He spent the day with these farmers as they were getting ready to do the spring planting.
Yeah, it's always great for us to see these, beautiful essays. And you mentioned Svi. He's one like you who would always I would get these monthly emails from him with just I didn't ask for them, but he would send me PDFs of pages of mine that I've shot for different sections, and no one else had ever done that, and it was just wow, I didn't ask him to do this, but he's taking the time to go find my byline and figure out who it should go to where.
I'm very proud of the fact that I learned a lot from Zvi in the 6 years that I was there, and I'm very proud to have worked with him during that period of time.
Yeah.
This is another example of the great tornado that hit Joplin, Missouri, and the press flies in. They cover all this, the burials, the damage, everything else, and then everyone leaves.
Yeah.
But I sent a photographer in to follow the insurance companies who were sending their disaster teams in to figure out how much they were going to have to pay out and stuff like that.
Interesting.
And this was, yet again, another business kind of story, but one that's rarely covered.
I like how you really you cover things from that aspect. It's just like real estate. You got in business. It's we're covering it from a business aspect.
Right,
Make sure to do it and coming up with those different stories. It's really great.
And then who would ever think that there's a business aspect to ice fishing in Minnesota? But there is. And I can't read their names here. I'm sorry. But it's a husband and wife team, Jen Ackerman and Tim Gruber.
Oh, yes, right.
Did a wonderful series of pictures where they took themselves out to their some of these lakes in Minnesota that are completely ice encrusted and covered over.
I think that's so cool. The married photo teams.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We just had Keith Bedford on, and his wife Shio is an amazing photographer as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So this is the big move into
a mobile platform, digital web.
This is sort of the future, right?
Yeah.
You were talking about.
Yeah.
We wanted to talk about where things are going, and one of the things I'll sort of set this up is New York Times basically started an app called NYT Now.
NYT Now.
I remember I downloaded it the first day thinking, oh my God, a new platform. And I'm sure there's going to be something for the watch.
I'm sure there will be. Yeah. No.
I mean,
I don't know, but I'm sure they will be.
I mean, so
what you're looking at here are frames. Each one is what we call on NYT Now the individual cards. And a shout out to Cliff Levy and Blake Wilson, who are the editors of NYT Now. My colleague Sandra Stevenson, who's still the picture editor there. And another shout out to my colleague Andrea Canapel, who I worked with in producing the evening slideshow. But it was my first time, and I'm sort of sad to have left the Times when I left, because it was a very small team. Much younger in age, but much wiser in ways of technology.
Sure.
And it was one of the most collaborative efforts I've ever had at the New York Times, and it was great to work with them.
Right.
But it was also one of the first times in my career as a picture editor where I didn't have to clear a certain photograph with the editors before I put it up on the...
you kind of had that sort of button. You could push the button.
Right. There were certain times when, especially on some of certain stories that might show a lot of blood and gore or something like that, and I felt I was doing that to make sure that we were in keeping with the standards and the ethics of the New York Times.
Right.
So again, some of the examples of just showing, the New England's winter weather storms this past year, the Jon Stewart portrait, the ongoing Ukraine crisis, and then getting ready for the Oscars.
It was neat for me opening this up both on my iPhone and my iPad for the first time, kind of like realizing, this is a new format. Let me see what it looks like on my iPad. I remember starting taking screen grabs of what it looked like, and I'm really excited to see where things go in the future, because who knows, in 10 years, I mean...
Well, see, I would just offer to you, because I don't know if you saw this or not, and to your viewers and readers, that the Pew Institute, I believe, came out with their 2015 State of the Media report, in which it went on to say that mobile applications up, newspapers continuing down.
Yeah.
And, so this and something more, I'm sure, is going to be the future in that sense. This is an example that I really wanted to show and emphasize here, and that is because these were frame grabs taken off of my iPhone, and if you look at the top center, you see the 3 different times, 4:24, 9:11, and 11:33. This was in regard to the story when in Ferguson, Missouri, the grand jury had decided not to indict the police officer.
Right.
And what I loved about, and I think this kind of format is incredible for this kind of story, is as the story developed through the evening, I kept subbing out and replacing and updating and refreshing the photographs.
Yeah.
So, whereas my colleague in the newspaper could only pick one photograph that would be representative, that would hopefully hold
until the next morning. I mean, it could be a different story in the morning.
Exactly right. I was actually changing the photograph every 2 hours.
Yeah.
And, and I felt part of that was because there was also the feeling of in my efforts, however small they may have been, to keep the NYT Now reader interested and, up to date with what's going on. This is what I was hoping to do.
That's amazing. And it's just, knowing that people are getting the information directly to their phone a lot. Like I have an automatic updates.
Right.
So something big happens, it pings me on the phone. I'll take a peek at it.
Another example in regard to the midterm elections and election night, again, going throughout the whole day at 4 p.m. when, everyone was still voting, and I just needed something illustrative in that sense. But then from 9:44 on, when the first results started to come in, all the way through and 12:30 or 12:27 on that stamp. But at 2 a.m, I had put up a slideshow with the final results showing who won, who lost in that sense. And a colleague of mine said that it turned out to be one of the most watched or viewed slideshows in NYT Now history.
That's really cool.
I thought so.
Yeah, I think I ended up coming into this, the New York Times world, right when digital was really starting to pop.
Correct.
I mean, if we look at the website from when I was an intern, I remember I had a really great, I thought it was a pretty good story on a young boy who, got stepped on a landmine or something and hurt himself, and couple guys flew him out to the United States, and I followed him around as an intern, and we did a multimedia piece with it. It was kind of difficult. It didn't run very well because we were limited. The photos on the homepage were tiny, and things have changed completely since then, even into these mobile platforms. Right. So it's really interesting. Do you I'm curious, what's your prediction with how things are going to be in the future?
I think the NYT Now format is exactly what the future is going to become, and I think, in some ways, I'm sorry that I'm gone, because I think they're going to improve it.
Oh yeah.
And I think they're going to find ways to expand on the visuals, both in still photography as well as videos. This is an aspect of the NYT Now called the RPix side, and the black frames represent that these are sort of standalone visual stories. So the photo editors, Sandra and I, had an opportunity to just pick and choose what we felt were the best pictures of that day and post them to the readers.
Yeah, because there's the news, which you guys have, and then you can swipe, and then there's the
aggregated side, which is our
and this is nice too. You can, if you see at the top right, you can bookmark these things. So
Correct.
I remember going through. I was in Barcelona, because my wife's from Barcelona, and I was there for Thanksgiving, and you guys started posting all these Thanksgiving recipes, and it was my task to introduce my Spanish family to Thanksgiving.
Fabulous.
So I went through and bookmarked all these recipes.
Great.
And ended up
there
making a couple of them. And that's cool because they stay in there.
Yes. Right.
The only thing with it is that I don't think that all the content from the website is on NYT Now, correct?
Right.
Maybe in the future, but at least, it's the daily type stuff. And your stuff, if you bookmark it, it saves.
Correct.
So that's pretty cool. Yeah. So one of the things that I circled here, which we haven't really discussed, was you had mentioned how timing, how sometimes getting a staff job, it's all about timing, right?
I'll give you a little history as far as how far the Times has come visually, from my opinion, and solely my opinion, and that is, if I were 25 again today, which was the age that I was hired at the New York Times, I don't think I would be able to get a job at the New York Times today.
Yeah.
And part of that is, at the time that I came on in 1984, they were looking for photographers that were specifically strong both in news and in sports. And that's because there was, as the new photographer, they were going to end up working a certain shift during their work week that included the majority of sports.
Right.
So that's where I felt that my portfolio stood out, because I had very strong sports. Photographers today that I see that are being hired, or that are, they're specialists, whereas I turned out, or I was always a generalist in that
me
sense.
too, yeah.
I was capable, or I felt I was always capable, and was to be able to take on any assignment and be able to do it, whether I was in the governor or the mayor's office for a portrait or a sit-down interview, and 2 hours later be riding the F train and covering the homeless.
One of the things that I've kind of noticed, I've never been a staffer. I mean, I've been a freelancer all my professional life, and an intern, which was staff for short periods of time. But I noticed the different people that are hired onto the Times, since I've been here and whatever. But do you seem to notice? It seems like nowadays you kind of need to have a really great background, even like an awards history. A lot of the photographers that have been hired have won Pulitzers or major awards. How important do you feel that? Because I'm one of these guys that I've only entered contests when other people have entered me in contests in the past.
Right.
So I've never been like a contest enterer, and I've never really felt like, it doesn't really matter. But I do notice that a lot of not that I'm searching for a staff job or anything, but I do notice that a lot of the staff photographers lately that have been hired are major award winners, Pulitzers and so on. And as a freelancer, I actually, for the first time ever, lost a job because they wanted a photographer that had an award-winning photographer.
Right.
And it ended up being somebody that I knew very well and respect tremendously. It's like one of those people like, well, if I'm going to lose out to someone, I'm honored that I'm considered, But, how important do you think that is? And
it's hard for me to say, and I don't know how to answer that question other than to say that there are some people and some photographers and some editors who feel that they place a high priority on contests, and others who don't.
Yeah.
And to be quite honest, I think it's a potpourri of things. I think it's chemistry.
Potpourri.
Thank you.
Nice.
But I think it's a little bit of certain things that come together, and I think it's a matter of timing. I think it's a huge thing of chemistry,
right,
in that sense of, especially when they're brought in for the interview, and what they're seeing, what they're thinking, what they're reading, how they interpret, how they respond. I think the editors look for those things within the portfolio, as well as the face-to-face interaction.
Yeah.
And how they carry themselves.
What would you say to a photographer who wants to get their work seen by the New York Times, to become a freelancer, just to get noticed? What's the best way for a photographer to connect with somebody like you were a month ago?
Well, I'm going to say two things. And first of all, the first thing I would say is they should reach out to you.
To me.
Yeah. And, I think you're doing
Call Kaplan.
Call Kaplan. I think you're doing a tremendous thing with this Photo Brigade, but I think, you are easily can pass on your experiences as to what worked for you at the New York Times and be able to share that. A little self-promotion here, and shameless, and forgive me, but my new website is up, and if we want to show that, it's entitled whythisimage.com.
Whythisimage.com.
And in the About page, when I talk about myself, I talk about that wonderful relationship that I had with photographers, and sometimes sitting side by side as we looked at their work. And when I would come across a certain photograph that they really felt this is the picture for the story, I would turn to them and say, why this image? And sometimes just hearing them talk about the elements as they came together and they sensed the timing of that picture and everything else, that's I would take that information and use that in the meetings that would sometimes help sell that picture to be into the presentation.
Yeah.
So
this is you just launched.
I just launched this, right?
And I mean that's important. Obviously, is to have a presence online.
It is.
And I've talked, for instance, Fred Conrad. There's different photographers that have recently left a long-term staff position where you've never had to have your own website, right? Right, and so it's difficult to it's difficult to kind of get on that bandwagon where you're kind of freelance now. You're looking for the next gig,
as I say, I'm looking for the next great chapter in my career.
Do you have any idea of the path that you want to take?
Well, my hope for myself is that I will end up at a organization working with a team in which I can continue to expand my learning and my knowledge of the mobile digital platform. I really do think that's going to be the future, and I want to have a hand in helping guide that company, that institution. It may not even be journalism anymore,
right.
But I think this is an amazing period of time for visual storytelling, and I think I have the knowledge and the wisdom as well as the curiosity to take it to the next level.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And you mentioned, I mentioned just before we got on the air, but you did some teaching as well.
Yes, right.
And that was true. You said that the Times
the New York Times sponsors the New York Times Student Journalism Institute. And what it is they take 24 college-age students from around the country who have applied for it, and I taught the photojournalism aspect of this institute for the last 10 years.
Okay.
So I have in some way have seen 40 some odd students, because I've had 4 photographers each year, and I have some 40 students that are out there, and I'm proud to say that several of them are actually staff photographers working at certain newspapers across the country now.
Awesome. So do you think that maybe there might be some teaching in your future?
I hope so. Yeah, I'm speaking to a couple of institutions here in the New York City area about seeing if maybe they would be interested in establishing a photojournalism program and how I can have a hand in that.
That would be really great.
And if that happens, I hope you'll invite me back so that we can talk about that.
Well, we can do stuff with your classes.
Indeed.
And
that would be great.
Another thing is like workshops. We're starting to get into workshops with Photo Brigade, and I've got a workshop happening in Maui.
There you go.
Coming up in a few weeks, actually.
Fabulous.
But these types of things, with Photo Brigade, we're trying to make this happen on a more regular basis with friends of mine that are maybe there's opportunity where we can work together as well.
Keep me on your short list.
Yeah, on the short. Yeah, you're on my short list.
Thank you.
Well, is there anything else that we've sort of missed? Were there any questions? Okay, no internet questions.
Okay. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a fine thing. I think you've answered everything. You're very eloquent with all of your discussions.
You're very kind.
But your social media. You're on social media?
Correct.
Yeah? Is it just Jose Lopez? Or?
So my Twitter handle would be at JRLopezNYC. And I am on Facebook. You can find me there. And again, my website has my email and contact information.
Go to whythisimage.com to check out all of what Jose has got to offer, his clips and I guess contact information.
Yes.
So
great.
I think that's it, Jose.
Again, thank you for this time. And my closing words would be a thank you to all those photographers and picture editors over the years who I have had the pleasure of working alongside with and who trusted me to do what they asked me to do.
Awesome, Jose. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody else can go to photobrigade.com/live to watch this episode or any of our other episodes, as well as see our upcoming events and live streams like this one's live right now.
Yeah,
so, everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you all.